The sun beat down on the arid Nevada plain like a hammer, relentless and dry. Dust curled around the ankles of a lone photographer trudging up a cracked, sun-bleached trail, his boots scuffing the dirt with each step. His name was Caleb Morgan, 34, lean, weathered by years chasing images of the forgotten and the wild. He carried a battered Canon camera around his neck, its strap frayed from years in deserts, forests and war zones. But today's assignment was supposed to be different. Peaceful. Simple. Wild Mustangs, symbols of freedom, roaming the Silver Canyon Range. Nothing dangerous. Nothing like what he was about to see. He paused atop a ridge, squinting into the shimmer of heat rising off the valley floor. The horizon rippled like a mirage. In the distance the land stirred. A herd was moving, slow and wary. Through the long lens of his camera, Caleb could make out the shifting bodies of Mustangs, their coats dusty and sunlit, tails flicking at invisible flies. There was grace in their motion, an ancient rhythm that whispered of survival and silence. Then he saw it. A single Mustang had broken from the herd. It was a black stallion, large, sinewy, with a mane that whipped in the hot wind like shredded silk. His eyes were dark as coal, glinting with something more than instinct. Purpose. Caleb lowered the camera slightly. Something about the stallion's behavior seemed deliberate. It wasn't spooked. It wasn't grazing. It was staring straight at him. A chill swept across Caleb's skin despite the heat. He raised the camera again, zooming in. The stallion took a step forward. Then another. Dust billowed behind him. It wasn't aggressive, not exactly. But it wasn't aimless either. Caleb took a cautious step backward, then stopped. He'd worked in war zones, he wasn't about to retreat from a horse. The stallion halted 20 feet away. A low snort flared from his nostrils. He pawed the ground once. Then he turned abruptly, cantering off to the east. For a moment, Caleb simply stood there, watching. Then something clicked in his mind. The stallion had tried to communicate. No, was communicating. Curiosity snapped tighter than a shutter. Caleb followed. The trail was dry and uneven, winding through rocky outcrops and sagebrush. The black stallion moved ahead like a ghost, always just visible, never too far. Caleb kept pace, sweat beading on his brow, fingers clenched tight around the camera. His breathing grew shallow, the silence of the landscape pressing on his ears. Half an hour passed. Then the stallion stopped. Caleb stumbled into a clearing surrounded by boulders, the air strangely still. The stallion stood to the side now, no longer the focus. Instead, Caleb's gaze dropped to the center of the clearing. A foal lay sprawled in the dirt. Its tiny body was coated in filth, legs twisted beneath it, eyes wide with panic. It was breathing, fast and shallow, but it wasn't moving. Caleb dropped to one knee beside it, the camera forgotten, instinct replacing art. The foal's flank rose and fell like a trapped bird. Fresh bruises marred its side. One leg looked grotesquely swollen as if kicked or trampled. "What happened to you?" Caleb murmured. He reached out a hand, slow and steady, letting the foal sniff his scent. It didn't flinch. Too exhausted. Its muzzle twitched, then relaxed. Trust in the smallest form. A soft snort made him turn. The stallion had edged closer now, just within reach. His head was low, ears forward, body tense. Caleb realized, stunned, that this wasn't the foal's sire. There were no signs of paternity in the way he hovered. This stallion had found the foal, not fathered it. But still he stayed. Protected. Let Caleb hear. A strange feeling settled in the pit of his stomach, humility maybe, or fear. Because nothing about this encounter made sense. Caleb knew horses didn't ask for help. They didn't seek out humans. They ran. They disappeared into legend. And yet here was this one. Waiting. Caleb scanned the area, spotting signs, scuffed ground, a broken branch, hoof prints leading from the north. There'd been a struggle. A scuffle, perhaps with another stallion. Or a predator. Something had gone wrong and this foal had been left behind. Or thrown away. He pulled a small water bottle from his pack and unscrewed the lid. Drenching a cloth, he dabbed it gently against the foal's lips. The foal blinked, then drank greedily from the fabric. Caleb let out a long breath. He needed to think. He needed to get the foal out of here or find a ranger station. But how? The stallion let out a low, rhythmic sound, somewhere between a snort and a hum. Caleb turned toward him. The Mustang pawed the dirt again, then took a few steps backward and looked over his shoulder. "No," Caleb said out loud. "You can't be asking me to follow you again." But the stallion only flicked his tail and trotted toward the ravine. Caleb hesitated. He couldn't leave the foal alone, not like this. But he had no cell signal and there were no visible landmarks. He glanced at the sun. 2 hours until dusk. The decision pressed on his spine like weight. He took off his shirt and folded it into a soft pad, lifting the foal's head and tucking it underneath. Then gently he brushed dust from its eyes. "Stay alive, little one," he whispered. "Just stay alive." Then he stood and followed the stallion. Down the rocky path, the stallion led him with strange certainty. Caleb followed cautiously, boots crunching on loose gravel. The ravine opened into a wider basin fringed with scrubby trees and shaded rock faces. The stallion halted at a clump of brush and looked back. Caleb pushed the branches aside. There, beneath the shade, lay a mare. Her body was still. Her eyes were closed. Blood matted her hind leg and chest, dried black and rust-colored. Caleb knelt instinctively, reaching for a pulse. There was none. Her ribs no longer moved. Flies buzzed quietly in the heat. The mare was dead. Caleb stepped back, heart sinking. This must have been the foal's mother. Maybe she'd fought off a predator. Maybe she died giving birth. It didn't matter. What mattered was that the foal was now alone. And the stallion, who wasn't family, had brought him here to show him. Caleb looked at the Mustang, words lodged in his throat. You knew I needed to see this." The stallion lowered his head as if in mourning. It wasn't just survival Caleb was witnessing. It was grief. Intelligence. A consciousness that defied everything he'd been told to believe about wild animals. There was purpose in the stallion's every move. A story in his silence. Caleb took photographs, just a few. Respectful. Documenting what he now understood was more than nature. It was emotion. Relationship. Mystery. When they returned to the foal, the sun had begun to fall. The foal stirred weakly at the sound of their approach. Caleb knelt beside it, offering water again. The stallion stood nearby, unmoving. The silence stretched long. The desert golden now. "I'm going to help him," Caleb said, voice hoarse. "I'll carry him if I have to." The stallion snorted softly. As Caleb reached down, positioning himself to lift the small, broken body, he felt the weight of something more than muscle and bone. He felt the weight of a story that had chosen him to tell it. And behind him, the stallion watched, unmoving. A sentinel of the wild. The dust lifted as Caleb stood. The foal whimpered faintly but did not struggle. His breath was hot against Caleb's collarbone. Slowly, steadily, the photographer began the trek back toward the world of men, guided not by compass but by instinct. And just behind him, silent as a shadow, the stallion followed. Neither looked back at the clearing where the mare lay. There was only forward now. Toward the unknown. Toward whatever waited in the dwindling light. And that's when Caleb realized, the Mustang hadn't just asked for help. He had entrusted him with something sacred. The sky had begun to bruise with dusk as Caleb reached the edge of the ridge, the foal cradled awkwardly in his arms, its weight surprisingly light. Each step jarred his spine, but he kept going, afraid to stop. Behind him, the black stallion trailed like a sentinel, close enough to be felt, far enough to remain untouchable. Caleb didn't dare speak to him again. Some silent understanding had passed between them in the ravine, and to disturb it with words felt like breaking a pact. The world around them faded into violet and gold. Shadows lengthened across the dirt path, and the wind picked up, cool against the sweat on Caleb's neck. He couldn't see his car yet, parked miles back near the old Ranger trailhead, but he knew he had to make it there before full dark. There were coyotes in these parts, sometimes worse. The foal stirred in his arms and let out a fragile whimper. Caleb adjusted his grip. "Almost there, kid," he murmured. "Just hang on." He wasn't sure who he was talking to anymore, the foal or himself. At the base of the hill, he paused beneath a spindly tree and lowered the foal to the ground. Its breathing had slowed, but it blinked up at him with eyes too large for its head, too knowing for its age. Caleb offered more water, coaxing the little creature to sip. The stallion stood nearby, ears twitching, eyes alert. A guardian, still watching. A strange pressure built behind Caleb's ribs. He was not a man known for sentiment. He'd shot revolutions and famine. He'd photographed mothers holding dead children and walked away because the story came first. But here in the dust, with a dying foal at his feet and a wild stallion breathing quiet thunder behind him, something in him cracked. This wasn't a story anymore. It was a responsibility. The walk resumed. Darkness fell fast. The desert transformed, colors drained into black and silver, and the world turned quiet except for the sound of Caleb's boots and the soft rasp of the foal's breath. The stallion was harder to see now, but Caleb knew he hadn't left. He felt him, a steady presence behind the brush, as if the land itself had grown eyes. When he finally saw the faint glint of his car's windshield, a wave of relief rushed through him so sharp it stole his breath. He quickened his pace. He laid the foal gently on a blanket in the back of his SUV, fashioning a cushion from his camera bag and extra shirts. The foal didn't resist. Caleb closed the trunk with a soft click, then turned. The stallion stood 20 feet away, silhouetted against the starlit horizon. "Thank you," Caleb said. It felt absurd but necessary. The stallion didn't move. Then, slowly, he dipped his head once, just once, before turning and vanishing into the scrub like a spirit dissolving into night. Caleb stood there for a long moment, breath caught, heart thudding. He didn't know what that gesture meant. Respect? Trust? Goodbye? He drove fast, careful not to jostle the foal. The local wildlife rescue center was an hour away, maybe more at night. He called ahead when signal returned, his voice strained and raw, giving details he barely remembered gathering. Found injured foal. Estimated 3 days old. No dam. Possible break in left foreleg. Dehydrated. Not aggressive. Weak. They told him to come. Of course they did. But even as he drove, Caleb felt like he was carrying more than a horse. He was carrying a question. And a witness. At the sanctuary, the vet met him at the gate, a tall woman named Marla with sun-leathered skin and quiet hands. She didn't ask many questions, only gestured for Caleb to lift the foal out while her assistants prepped the medical bay. "Name?" she asked briskly. "I didn't give it one," Caleb replied. "Didn't feel right." She nodded. "Might not make it through the night." "I know. But the foal did. Barely." They stabilized him, cleaned his wounds, splinted the leg, fed him electrolyte paste and goat's milk through a tube. Caleb stayed. Slept in the waiting room on a folding chair, camera still around his neck like a relic. When dawn broke, soft and pink, Marla came out with a tired smile. "He's fighting," she said. "Might have a chance." Caleb exhaled slowly and rubbed his face. He felt like he hadn't blinked in days. "You do this often?" he asked. "Foals? Rarely. Wild ones? Never." She studied him. "What made you pick him up?" Caleb hesitated. He didn't know how to explain the stallion. How do you tell someone a wild animal sought you out, led you across a desert, showed you death and left you life? Sounded like a dream. Or a lie. "He looked at me like he knew I could help," he finally said. "And I couldn't not." Marla nodded once, accepting that without question. "We'll keep him under observation. You can visit. But don't get attached." Caleb smiled faintly. Too late. Over the next 3 days he returned every morning, sometimes staying until the stars came out. He named the foal Dusty. It felt right, not poetic but honest. Dust was what he'd been buried in. What he'd almost disappeared into. And what he'd been pulled back from. Dusty's condition teetered on the edge of fragile. Some days he drank and stood briefly. Other days he shivered and didn't respond. But he looked at Caleb. Always. And that look rooted deeper than Caleb expected. The world outside shrank. Emails, deadlines, editor calls. He ignored them all. His camera sat untouched in the corner. On the 4th morning, Caleb brought it to the pen and took the first photo. Dusty standing, legs wobbly, eyes bright. It felt like photographing a miracle. He uploaded the image later that night and sent it to his editor without a caption. Within 20 minutes, his phone buzzed. Asterisk, where is this? Who's the horse? Is there a story? Asterisk. Caleb stared at the screen, then turned it over and placed it face down. The story wasn't ready. Or maybe it wasn't his to tell yet. That evening he walked the trail behind the sanctuary, a narrow dirt path skirting the desert's edge. The moon had risen full, ghostly white and massive over the hills. He stopped near a small rise, breath catching in his throat. There, at the crest, stood the stallion. Unmistakable. Black as coal. Unmoving. Their eyes met across the space. A strange calm settled over Caleb's shoulders. "You came back," he whispered. The stallion took a slow step forward. Not close. Just enough. Then he turned and looked behind him. Caleb's heart thudded. Another horse emerged from the shadows. Smaller, limping, ribs visible through her sides. A mare. Wounded. Her gait was jerky, hesitant. She stopped beside the stallion, trembling, then lowered her head. Not the dead one from the ravine. Another. Alive. Caleb watched, stunned. She looked at him, and for a moment, all the pieces trembled into place. The stallion had brought her. But why? He took a cautious step forward. The mare flinched but didn't flee. Behind him, the sanctuary lights twinkled. Caleb turned back toward them, then looked again at the horses. The stallion and mare were gone. Vanished. as if they had only come to make a point, and left it behind in Caleb's chest like a buried ember. He walked back slowly, the silence around him dense and meaningful. When he entered Dusty's stall, the foal looked up, ears twitching. "You're not the end of the story," Caleb said quietly. "You're the beginning." Dusty blinked once. Outside, the wind stirred the desert scrub. Something had shifted. And Caleb felt it. Buried in the dust was more than loss. There was reason. And the truth was starting to rise. Caleb had never intended to return to the ravine. He told himself he had done what he could, that Dusty was safe, that the stallion had vanished like a specter into the sagebrush. But something kept pulling him back. Not guilt. Not curiosity. Something deeper. Like a splinter of truth lodged under his skin, refusing to be ignored. On the 7th morning since the rescue, with Dusty strong enough to stand without assistance, Caleb loaded his camera into the SUV and drove out before sunrise. The desert unfolded in soft golds and dusky oranges, wind cutting through the heat like a blade made of silk. He passed landmarks he barely remembered from the night of the rescue, a twisted juniper tree, a bleached cow skull, a rusted windmill ticking gently in the breeze. When he reached the ravine, the sun hovered just above the eastern rim. The light was honest here. No shadows to hide behind. He parked, slung his camera over his shoulder, and walked to the spot where he'd first seen the stallion. Everything was still. The tracks were gone, erased by wind or time, but the memory of them lived in Caleb's chest with painful clarity. He knelt at the edge where the mare had fallen, where the foal had been waiting to die. He touched the dirt with his fingers, half expecting to feel some echo, some remnant of heat or presence. But the earth was cold. Something glittered in the dust. He brushed away sand to reveal a fragment of silver, flat, thin, no bigger than a coin. When he lifted it, sunlight caught on etched letters. C-17 BLM. Bureau of Land Management. Caleb stood slowly, stomach sinking. The piece wasn't from a horse. It was a tag, likely from a trap, an ID marker from a federal roundup. But no roundup had been scheduled here, not this year. Not officially. He pocketed the tag and stood in silence, mind unraveling. The stallion hadn't just found him to save a foal. He had led Caleb to a crime. The fire was still smoldering beneath the dust. Back at the sanctuary, Caleb found Marla crouched in the main pen, feeding Dusty a bottle with one hand and checking his splint with the other. The foal whickered softly when he saw Caleb. "He's eating better," she said. "Might be trotting in a few weeks." Caleb handed her the metal tag. She examined it with furrowed brows. "BLM? Out here?" "No roundup scheduled," Caleb said. "I checked 3 times. Marla's lips thinned. "Then someone's running a rogue operation. Private contractors?" She nodded grimly. "Could be. They hire freelancers sometimes. Some care about the animals. Some," she trailed off. "Some don't." They looked at Dusty. The colt's ribs still showed, but his eyes were brighter now. He bumped against Marla's hand playfully. Caleb turned away, jaw tightening. "I want to know what happened out there." Marla stood and dusted off her hands. "That's not just a photographer talking." "No, it's not." That afternoon he drove to the local BLM office. A squat concrete building that looked more like a post office than a government outpost. Inside, the air smelled of burnt coffee and dried ink. A woman at the front desk eyed him with faint suspicion. "I'm looking into a possible illegal roundup near Dry Gulch Ravine," he said plainly. The woman raised an eyebrow. "We haven't issued permits for that zone this season. I found a BLM tag out there. C-17. Her fingers paused on the keyboard. "I'll have someone speak with you." 10 minutes later, a man in his 50s emerged from the back office. Tan windbreaker zipped up high despite the heat. His handshake was firm but reluctant. "Dan Reese, field manager. You said you found a tag?" Caleb handed it over. Dan's face darkened. "This tag's from a batch assigned to a holding facility in Nevada. They shouldn't be in Arizona at all. So someone's poaching Mustangs with government tags? Possibly. Or someone's repurposing them to make it look legal. Either way, that's a felony." Caleb hesitated. Could it explain a mare with a broken spine and a foal left to die? Dan looked at him sharply. "You saw that?" "I have photos." Dan's tone dropped. "We've suspected unlicensed trapping in that area, but we've never caught them in the act. We need proof." "I want to help," Caleb said, surprising himself. Dan gave a slow nod. "You willing to go back out there?" Caleb thought of the stallion. The foal. The way the mare's body had looked in the dust. Yes. The plan was simple. Return to the ravine at dusk, wait, observe. Bait if necessary. If someone was operating under cover of night, they'd show eventually. Caleb set up a remote camera system, hidden in a clump of mesquite, lenses facing every entry point. Dan stationed a small drone in the sky. They waited, engines off, breath shallow. Hours passed. The stars burned brighter than they had any right to. Coyotes yipped in the distance. The land stretched on in breathless silence. Then, just past midnight, a set of headlights bobbed over the ridge. Caleb's heart jumped. He crouched lower, finger on the remote shutter. A white pickup. Unmarked. It rolled to a stop near the same place the stallion had first appeared. Two men climbed out, shadows in the darkness. They moved quickly, practiced. One pulled out a rusted metal gate. The other carried a tranq rifle. A soft whinny echoed from the distance. Caleb's stomach turned. There were horses nearby. Wild ones. He snapped photo after photo. Faces, plates, equipment. Dan's drone buzzed overhead, low and silent. The men didn't notice. They opened the makeshift trap, scattered hay and salt blocks, and retreated into the truck. Waiting. Like predators. But the stallion was already watching. Caleb saw him before the men did. Standing on the ridge above, silhouette sharp against the stars. Unmoving. Waiting. And then he screamed. The sound was raw, ancient, electric. The desert answered. 3 more horses surged forward, a small band likely his own. Mara's another foal. They didn't run into the trap. They circled wide, avoiding it. The stallion danced closer, hooves striking stone. A challenge. A warning. The truck doors flew open. One of the men raised the tranq gun. No, Caleb hissed. He bolted from cover. The flash of the gun's muzzle lit the night. The stallion reared. But the shot missed. Caleb reached the trap, kicking down the makeshift gate, shouting at the top of his lungs. BLM enforcement incoming. You're trespassing. Dan's drone dropped lower, flashing lights now visible. Sirens, fake but effective, began to scream from the speakers. The men panicked. They ran, leapt into their truck, and peeled away into the night. Caleb stood in the dust, breath heaving. The stallion stood not 10 feet from him now. His chest heaved, eyes wild, but he didn't run. He looked at Caleb, then at the broken trap. Then he turned and disappeared into the brush. The photos were enough. By dawn, warrants had been issued. The men were identified as private contractors who'd lost their permits in Nevada 2 years prior. They'd been operating illegal captures across state lines, selling Mustangs to slaughterhouses disguised as adoption farms. Caleb's photos were splashed across every major media outlet within days. One image in particular went viral. The stallion standing tall against the stars, a defiant silhouette over a field of dust and wire. Caleb sat in the sanctuary garden when the call came from his editor. You found the story of the year, she said breathlessly. A wild horse leading a man to expose criminal roundups? It's cinematic. It's legend. Caleb stared at the photo in his hands. It's truth, he replied. And it's not mine. I just followed the tracks. In Dusty's pen the foal walked now, slow but steady. Marla watched from the gate, arms crossed, pride hidden behind a tough expression. You changed, she said softly. I think I remembered who I was supposed to be, he answered. She smiled. The stallion didn't return. But Caleb no longer needed him to. Because in the dust, fire had sparked. And now it burned bright with truth. The sanctuary was quiet that morning. Not silent. Life stirred in subtle ways, but still enough to feel sacred. A soft breeze carried the scent of hay and dust, mingling with the faint whinnies of the mustangs grazing beyond the ridge. Caleb stood alone near the main paddock, camera at his side, eyes resting on Dusty. The foal was stronger now, his legs no longer trembling under the weight of his own survival. He trotted along the fence, tail flicking, curiosity blossoming in his gaze with every new dawn. Caleb had documented wars, famines, and riots. He had stood inches from despair, capturing it through glass and lens. But here now, as Dusty nuzzled the fingers of a little girl visiting the sanctuary with her father, Caleb realized he had never truly witnessed hope. Not like this. Not growing, not healing, certainly not free. You're leaving, aren't you? Marla's voice broke softly across the paddock, as sure as if she'd read the decision etched on his face. He turned to her slowly. Yeah. There's another story waiting. She walked up beside him, boots crunching on gravel. They always are. But I think this one's different, he said, squinting toward the distant hills. This one's not just for printing. Marla nodded, leaning against the fence. You stayed longer than you expected. I needed to understand. And now, Caleb exhaled. Now I need to tell it right. Over the past few weeks, the arrests had sparked outrage across the country. Caleb's photographs had ignited a firestorm. Protesters stood outside federal buildings demanding reform. Politicians scrambled for statements. But what Caleb noticed most were the letters, thousands of them, piling into the sanctuary and his inbox alike. Handwritten notes from children. Emails from retired ranchers. Messages from people who had never cared about Mustangs until they saw a stallion guarding a foal like a sentinel from myth. They weren't just reading the story. They were feeling it, living it, and asking what came next. Caleb hadn't set out to become their voice. But the stallion had chosen him, and that meant something. It meant the truth couldn't be buried again. He had begun piecing the rest together. Interviewing whistleblowers, tracking financial records, unraveling a network of corruption that stretched across state lines like veins feeding a diseased heart. He worked beside Dan Reese now, forming an independent watchdog committee that partnered with journalists and equine advocates. The story had started in the dust, but it was spreading, rising like thunder across the plains. Still, there was one thing unfinished. One truth left in shadow. The stallion. Caleb didn't expect to find him. After that night, the wild horse had vanished into the hills without trace or trail. He had left Dusty in their care, as if understanding the foal needed humans now. As if, once his message had been delivered, he was ready to return to the place men could not reach. But something deep inside Caleb needed to try. Not just for closure. For gratitude. So on his final morning at the sanctuary, Caleb packed a single bag, loaded his camera, and rode out alone. He didn't tell Marla. She would have understood, but he didn't want understanding. He wanted silence. And the truth. The desert greeted him like an old friend, wiser than when they'd last met. He passed the ravine, now scarred with tire tracks and caution tape, and continued farther into the brushlands. Days passed. He camped under stars, drank from streams, followed hoofprints where he could find them. Sometimes he saw other Mustangs, a gray mare with a scarred shoulder, a group of colts kicking up dust as they sparred, but never the one he was looking for. On the fifth morning, he rose early and climbed a ridge before sunrise. He saw movement. Not far down in the basin. A single figure. Dark, regal, utterly still. Caleb didn't move. He hardly breathed. The stallion stood in a pool of morning light, head high, mane rippling like war banners in the breeze. He hadn't changed. If anything, he looked more myth than animal now. Stronger. Wilder. Free. Caleb lifted his camera. The stallion turned, eyes locking with Caleb's. And waited. He didn't bolt. Didn't threaten. Just watched. As if asking, "Are you ready to see?" Caleb lowered the camera. Then stepped forward. The stallion stayed where he was, hooves firm in the grass. Caleb walked slowly, with reverence, closing the space between them until only a few yards remained. He knelt, not as a gesture of worship, but of respect. "You saved him," Caleb said quietly. "And me." The stallion blinked once. A gust of wind lifted dust between them. The horse took a single step forward. Then another. Caleb held his breath. The stallion stopped a few feet away. He didn't touch him, didn't bow or rear. But he stood close enough that Caleb could see the glint of something in his mane, a small strand of barbed wire, likely tangled during the night of the trap. Caleb reached up slowly, gently, and removed it. The stallion didn't flinch. He turned, stepped away, and trotted back toward the ridge. Then paused. And looked back. Just once. And then he was gone. Caleb stood in that place for a long time, clutching the twisted wire. It wasn't just a relic. It was a reminder, of pain, yes, but also of survival. Of what still needed to be fought for. When he returned to the sanctuary, Marla met him at the gate. "You saw him," she said, not asking. "I did." She smiled softly. "And?" "He's real." Her eyes misted. "I never doubted it." That afternoon, Caleb gave his final talk at the sanctuary, surrounded by visitors, journalists, and volunteers. Dusty, now steady on his legs, trotted beside the fence, earning gentle applause from the children watching. Caleb stepped to the center of the garden, camera hung around his neck, and held up the piece of barbed wire. "This," he said, "is what we leave behind when we don't look." He turned it in the sunlight. "But this," he reached into his bag and pulled out the photo of the stallion in the stars, "is what happens when we do." The crowd listened in silence. These animals aren't just symbols of the West. They're stories. Living, breathing, galloping truths. And right now they need us to be more than witnesses. They need us to be defenders. He met Marla's eyes. Then the little girl's. Then Dusty's. I thought I came here to take a picture. But I think I was meant to receive one. Pause. And that's the story I'll keep telling. The sanctuary received more funding in the following months than in the last 5 years combined. Volunteers arrived in waves. Caleb's story was adapted into a short documentary, screened in high schools and legislative offices across the country. But none of that changed the desert. It remained vast, fierce, and sacred. Exactly as the stallion would have wanted. And sometimes, when the sun dipped just right and the wind carried the scent of freedom, a dark figure appeared on a ridge beyond the sanctuary. Watching. Guarding. A reminder that the truth cannot be caged. And that some stories once freed run forever.